welcome to Leading for Life Stories Season 3. I'm Bob Judson, I'm the host for this podcast, and I'm absolutely delighted to have you here joining me. Regardless of whether you're a seasoned listener who's been with me since the beginning, or whether you've just dropped in for the occasional episode, I really hope you enjoyed the mix of content that I provide, the personal stories, the thematic episodes, and the guests that I have on the show. And I hope you find it all interesting and at least some of it useful. And without further ado, let's go. Welcome back, everybody. This week's a really special one for our guests, and I'm so delighted to bring you the actor Martin Shaw. Martin, well known in most circles for an amazing body of work across 6 decades in the acting profession in stage, screen. He's been in huge hit series on TV like Judge John Deed, Inspector George Gently, and go back in time, you'll find The Professionals. And he talks about all of those in what he does, but he's also very, very well known as a stage actor. And I've seen him a number of times in plays over the years, and he's just an immensely impressive character with a huge amount of experience behind him. And of course, he's played some really interesting leadership roles, which links it to why I was really keen to get him on the podcast, because that kind of shaping of characters and building your character around leading figures like Judge John Deed, playing a professional in the legal world, takes work and effort and an understanding of leadership to do that. So although Martin would be the first to say probably he's not a leader in the traditional sense, he's not sitting there with teams of people working for him, he's definitely got all the relevant experience to have a great conversation on the podcast. And of course it's fascinating. And to cap it all, he's a pilot. He's got a private aeroplane. He's been a private pilot for a long time in his life. That's how we first met, through flying, and again we talk about that kind of thing in the podcast. So it's just great fun. It's really, really interesting, really informative, and you'll get some fantastic insights into an amazing character who, certainly for anyone in the UK, where he's probably best known, is something of a national treasure. So it was a real joy to have him on the podcast, and I really hope you enjoy the conversation. We certainly did. We've known each other for a long time, and it was just great fun. So off we go. Well, Martin, what a privilege to have you on my podcast. I could not be more delighted. We've known each other for a long time, but I am just so pleased and proud to have you on the show. Thank you very, very much for joining.
Thank you, and likewise, Bob. Right back at you.
Yeah, oh, that's kind. I mean, just to get us started, you've got 60 years, I think, now in the acting profession, and you're not finished yet. So there's a ton of stuff we can talk about your life, your overall career journey. And I suspect a lot of my listeners and viewers will, certainly the UK ones, will know you from some of your key TV roles. I mean, Inspector George Gently and Judge John Deed, etc. But, there's a ton more stuff that is behind that. So just to, can you give us a bit of a summary? Just tell us, your journey from whenever you started to now.
Give me just a quick summary of the last 60 years.
Exactly. A short précis of the last 60 years.
Short précis of the last 60 years. I found when I was at school that I was pretty crap at everything. And it was only in much later life that I managed to work out that the education system was for me, not for the teacher who was standing in front of me. And so being precocious when it came to analysis of other people's personality, but without the balance of kind adulthood, I thought, this guy's an idiot, so I'm not going to work. And so the only 2 people who I did respond to were my English teacher and my drama teacher. And since, as everybody will know, if you're bad at things at school, life can be really miserable because your teacher makes your life a misery. And so that went all through my school days, which I absolutely hated. But during those school days, I started doing drama. I found that Shakespeare and associated subjects in English literature were very easy for me to understand. And so we started doing, after I left school quite early, we started doing semi-professional dramatics, amateur dramatics or semi-professional on the bomb sites in Birmingham, which in 1963, there were lots of them. And so we did a commedia dell'arte type of performance, the old ancient sort of strolling players tradition, and we improvised a story which we had rehearsed during the week in a rented village hall or school hall, and then performed that for the local children, calling ourselves the Pied Piper Players. And we would walk through the ruins of Birmingham, collect a bunch of children, put them in a circle, and then improvise a play. I then acquired a girlfriend who said that she was going to RADA. And I thought, ooh, I'm going to be left behind. And so I auditioned for drama school. I auditioned for RADA. And I got a well done, try again next time. And so I also auditioned for Lambda, which was one of the three greats, RADA, Lambda, and Central at that time. I got into Lambda. And then after that went into rep. And then mutatis mutandis, here I am.
Yeah, it's that is a very short précis of what has been an amazing career by any measure. So for sure we're going to unpack some of that. I mean, I think earlier motivations than that. Notwithstanding what you just said about school, did you actually have a kind of leaning into drama from really early on, or because you've obviously got a huge amount of natural talent for it to to have made an entire career out of it? Did you look at anything else, or was it just that's what I'm going to go to, and I've just stuck with it?
Well, initially, before all of that, I mean, I think like a lot of people, I thought, well, maybe I'll just do what Dad does. And my dad was an engineer and had an extraordinary mind. I mean, for example, I came home with my maths homework once. And it was quadratic equations. I don't know whether you remember those.
But I remember trying to learn them and not doing very well at them either.
So, yes, I mean, it's quite a complicated formula, which now I do remember, strangely enough. But when my dad, after an hour and a half of my, almost weeping with frustration, my dad came in and he said, "Do you want any help with this homework?" I said, yes, please. He said, "What are you doing?" I said, "Quadratic equations." And he said, "Well, what's the formula?" And I said, I don't know. And he looked at me quite sternly. He said, "Well, if you don't learn the formula, you can't do the equation, can you?" So after a moment, he said, "Well, I can't remember it either." And if you remember with quadratic equations, they give you the problem, and then there are two answers. But the important bit is the workings in between. So we had the answers, and we had the problem. They wanted to see your workings. And so Dad said, "Never mind, I'll look at the answers and I'll work backwards and derive the equation." And he would not let go. And so we sat there for an hour and a half while he worked out the equation. So this was kind of what I was up against if I wanted to follow in my father's footsteps. So I was and still am virtually innumerate. So I sat an exam at the company he worked for and was summarily rejected as completely useless. My parents both had done amateur dramatics when they were younger. And so there was something of it in the blood. My dad was a brilliant teller of jokes, which he would do a lot. And he always embroidered the jokes a lot, and they were longer than they needed to be before the punchline. So to that extent, I think it was in the blood. But so far, or up until that point, I'm the only one who was going to go into acting. They were all Birmingham gunsmiths, engineers, and all that sort of Midlands industrialists.
I bet your parents must have been massively proud, though, of everything you achieved. I mean, even if they were
eventually they were, which was completely wonderful. But initially they were terribly concerned because, quite rightly, they said acting is one of the most insecure professions that you could possibly go into, and of course it's 100 times worse now.
Yeah, for sure.
the pressures that the profession faces. But yeah, eventually I went to drama school in London, and off we went.
Yeah, it's fascinating the in the blood thing because, as I think you know, my dad died when I was very young, and I mean, he was a pilot, obviously, he was an Air Force pilot during World War II, and I have no memory of him really at all. I mean, I was only 3 years old. I suppose it's not surprising I don't. But clearly, there was something there that then lit that kind of go flying fire in me, and that was then my career. So it is interesting how it works, isn't it? Because you'd think there would have to be a bit more connective tissue to make that work in some ways, but
Well, yes, I know. What did
yeah.
your father fly?
Blenheims during the war. So
Oh,
actually, he was very lucky to get through the war. To be honest,
yeah.
they obviously took horrendous loss rates.
Mm.
And he flew some pretty hairy missions. But he got a distinguished flying cross, flying against the Cologne power stations, daylight raid, sub 150 feet. In a in an old Blenheim. And I've got a number of books, which some of which mention him. But the interesting thing is when you look at the total numbers of losses of Blenheim squadrons in particular, they were horrendous. And I did an interview a little while ago with a guy called Colin Bell, who's still alive,
Mhm.
about to be, if he's I hope he makes it there in March next year. He'll be 105. And he was a mosquito pilot, and in fact, when we were talking, we were talking about the Blenheim bit, and he said, yeah, they called them flying coffins during the war, and they were
Yeah,
they
I've
was
read. Yeah.
that bad.
Mm.
So yeah, interesting. But yeah, at least he did, because Colin said, did he survive the war? I said, well, it's a good job he did, Colin, because I'm not quite that old. I would definitely have needed to have him surviving plus a bit.
Mhm.
But jumping back to you again on the acting front, I mean, you're as I mentioned at the outset, you're best known probably for some of your TV roles, but you've done a huge amount of stage work. I mean, that's where I most recently saw you, when you were doing A Man for All Seasons, and the haircut's still there for doing another round of it. As we joked about off air, but you've also done some film work, and I'm just interested in your kind of perspectives on the different genres and what you prefer, and how that works for you.
Yeah, I'm often asked that question, and I think probably because of my capricious nature, I would always want to be doing the one that I'm not doing currently. And that's because essentially, as far as performing is concerned, apart from volume, basically, they're both exactly the same. However, they are both incredibly tiring. And it's very hard to understand when you see the finished product how it can possibly be so exhausting. And after 60 years of experience, I still don't quite understand why theatre is as tiring as it is. I have theories, but they're only theories. So when I'm on stage, I really want the immediacy and the first idea that you have that you get with filming. That when I'm filming, I want to have the opportunity to dig deep and go into the deep, ongoing research of a character that you get with theatre because you're repeating and repeating and repeating. But essentially, they're same, which is to mine the truth of a character, find out what the author is trying to say, and then just get on with it. The wonderful thing about theatre is that it's going to be, if you're doing your job properly, it's going to be different every single night. Every night. Whereas if you're filming, a lot of it depends on the director. Some directors, like Clint Eastwood, for instance, rarely does more than one take. And so your first idea is that's it. That's your idea. Other directors are intensely frustrating, who I've often worked with, where you absolutely hit something on the nail on one take. And he will say, oh, marvelous, marvelous, marvelous. Can we do that again? And it's very difficult to, if they are not simpatico with the way actors work, it's very difficult to say, well, actually, no, I can't do that again, because that just was something that happened to me.
Yeah, that's as good as it's going to get.
Yeah,
Yeah. Yeah.
yeah.
How much, I mean, when you're doing that kind of thing, I mean, obviously in theatre, clearly you're rehearsing it, you shape it a little bit in the rehearsals, and then you do it on the stage. And Obviously, you can iterate it for the various performances, but when you're filming, you've obviously got that ability, or the director has that ability to do it again and again and again and again.
Mhm.
How much voice do you have in that versus the director's voice? Can you turn around and shape the character to your will, as it were, or is a lot of it going to be driven by what the director slash producers want?
It depends on the director. I mean, I suppose in a sense, I imagine, not having been there, I can only imagine, but I imagine in a sense it's easier in the military because whether you agree or disagree, basically you just have to do it because you were bound by a code of discipline. In acting, it's very variable. It depends upon the director, but
Mm,
really, and on the producer. So sometimes some actors will say, "No, I'm sorry, that's it. I'm not doing anymore." No, that's it. That's it. And that creates a tension, which is damaging. Because in a very, very strange and subtle way, the director, even if he's many years younger than you are, and in my case, that's now most of them, there is a sort of a child-parent relationship in that you have to put a very vulnerable part of your psyche into another person's hands. So it depends on the person, on the director. For myself, I will do almost anything to avoid any kind of conflict and try to adjust and adjust and adjust. If there comes a point where it's clearly wrong, then one has to take the director aside and say, no, no, this won't work.
interesting. I mean, your point about the military and you just kind of do what you're told is the interesting thing for me with some of the leadership work I do these days is I guess one of the very common commercial misconceptions is that the military is all about hierarchical leadership. It's all authoritarian. You just basically say jump and someone says how high. And of
Mm.
course, the reality is, yes, that exists as a tool. You can do that. You can order people to do stuff. But nearly all the military leaders I know and throughout my time would, I think, almost certainly say they've done that very, very rarely. The reality is you're always trying to work with consensus. You're always trying to build
Mm.
the kind of right relationship with the people that are working for you. Particularly, I mean, in the Air Force and the Navy and the technical elements of the Army, I found all the time that the people working for me were better qualified in terms of academic qualifications and so on than I was. I left school with A levels, jumped straight into the Air Force. A lot of the guys working for me would have university degrees, even the airmen as well, and therefore they would ask questions, they would probe, they wanted to be led with reasoning behind it, not just blindly. And therefore you had to have that kind of right argumentation to make your points that were going to land, so that you could actually then inspire them, hopefully, to follow you more than once. And I think it sounds very similar. And you want to have that kind of collective move forward and so on amongst all of the people. You don't want outliers, and we'll come back to that on your side in a minute because I'm interested in different actor relationships. But in terms of building a team, trying to keep it cohesive and move it forward with everyone on side, everyone playing their part, recognizing when they're leading, recognizing when they're following. Even the people that are good leaders need to be good followers, etc. All is really important, I think. I mean, looping it back to the acting side, I mean, you must obviously have different tensions amongst different actors as well. I mean, you've clearly got, you're now at the stage where, you're one of these people for sure that, people are going to be looking at you and going, wow, this is Martin Shaw, which is, it must be a nice position to be in when you're at the other end of that journey and you're looking at kind of the really significant, great career actors that you'll have worked with as well. How does that relationship work? Is there a kind of junior senior thing, and how do you play it?
Again, when I'm talking to people, so vague about it, but it depends. It depends on the actor. I mean, as you say, I mean, very, very early on, I worked with John Gielgud, and I was in awe of him. But I mean, you can blip this if you like because there's some serious language coming up. I on the day on the day that we were all introduced to the great Sir John, it was a small cast. I was only 23, and I was playing a leading role opposite John Gielgud. And Peter Hall was the director, Sir Peter Hall. And when Peter Hall introduced us, we were, it was a small cast, but we stood up and he was taking us person to person. And he came up to me and he said, and John, this is Martin. And John Gielgud looked at me, held out his hand and said, "Oh, how do you do? You're frightfully handsome. I suppose you're married to Count." So that kind of set the tone. So that's the kind of leader that you can work with, because he was completely generous, always professional, extraordinarily funny. I think I've been very, very lucky in my career, because in those 60 years, I can only recall 2 people that I've worked with that were really very, very difficult, very difficult. And even then, one of them, whom I met 7 or 8 years later, who then apologized and said, "I'm so sorry, I was appalling when we worked together, but I had a drinking problem."
Interesting.
So yes, I've been lucky in that respect. I think I have a way with dealing with very difficult actors, which is just to stand back and let them have a go.
Mm.
I remember I did a play years ago now with the lovely Hannah Gordon, and it was essentially a three-hander, 3 enormous roles in a very intense American play. And the actor that was going to be cast, older than myself, was brilliant, but known to be very, very, very difficult. And so Hannah and me said, "Well, let's just get on with it." And so when he kicked off in rehearsal and started expostulating and shouting and stuff, we just said nothing and didn't join in. And after a while, he just wound down. And then after 2 or 3 days of this, he just laughed and he said, "I know what you're doing, you bastards. You're just letting me rage it out, aren't you?" And I found that often works. So, I mean, I have little to contribute, I think, in the area of leadership, other than the fact that just not join in people are being difficult, because then you got 2 assholes in the room. And
Yeah, don't amplify the problem. Yeah, I totally get that. I mean, interestingly, I think you mentioning working with John Gielgud. I mean, one thing I don't think you know about me, my father was born in South Africa. He came over to the UK before the war, went to Cambridge University, but then he was an actor, and on his service record, it's his profession as he joined the Air Force was he was an actor. And my mum tells me, I mean, this is long before she met him as well, but he was a pretty good actor. He worked with Laurence Olivier. He was went to Stuart Granger's wedding, apparently. He, so he was clearly, was in that space. But then it all changed, obviously, with World War II, and then he stayed in the Air Force after the war. So it was those kind of different.
Well, what did you work with Olivier on?
I don't know, sadly. I mean, this is one of those things where the big gaps in terms of what I've got. But on my bookshelves behind me, I've got lots of his books, which include lots of plays and various acting works from classics and things like that you would absolutely recognize. And I mean, I've got some interesting books. I've got a book which is by complete works of Tennyson, signed by Tennyson, this sort of stuff. Which is lovely, and it's great to have that piece. I just wish I knew a bit more, and I wish I'd had the opportunity to kind of discuss it with him, because it would have been really interesting. He clearly didn't pass that gene on to me, by the way, because I am utterly useless at that sort of thing. That's just not at all where it goes. And interestingly, I have a half brother and a half sister from his first marriage, and my dad was a very, very, very good with his hands. He was extremely good at woodwork and metalwork, and was very passionate about doing that, made lots of things. All that is in my half brother, big time. I mean, he still does that. He's been an engineer for most of his life. He's retired now, but was really active in that space, and I love doing it. But I obviously went down the Air Force track instead. And it is, so it's again back to that genetics thing. Obviously, it does get passed around a little bit, doesn't it?
Yeah, absolutely. But I mean, it isn't. It's now my brother, my younger brother, has got my father's genius gene, and so he is extraordinarily clever, but clever in every single direction. So it's not entirely focused; it just goes all over the place.
Right. Yeah. Don't you hate people like that?
Yes, a little bit. Yeah, yeah. But there's always been a connection with airplanes because my father, right from as long as I can remember, till when I was very, very small, it was aeroplanes, 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 aeroplanes. My father tried to get into the RAF, and his eyesight put him out of virtually everything. So he couldn't do that, but we were always around aeroplanes. And I was raised from birth within walking distance almost of Castle Bromwich.
Right.
And so I grew up looking at the sky and seeing Spitfires and Ancasters and so on, Avro Ansons, all of the contemporary, immediately post-war aeroplanes. And my father would say, "What's that one?" I mean, the famous gotcha for me was the similarity between the Airspeed Oxford and the Avro Anson. And I
Right.
went, "Anson?" He said, "No, that one's an Oxford." But one of the things that my dad used to say was one of his jobs, one of his engineering jobs, was to work on the Canberra, the first Canberra, the one that got the world altitude record. And he worked on some system, and I never quite understood it, and I still don't, but something to do with drying the air in the aeroplane. But it had to be really properly dry, some sort of a central machine to enable it to operate at high altitude. And he always used to say, whenever we saw the Canberra thereafter at air shows, which we saw a lot at Castle Bromwich, he would say, "Oh yes, I did a lot of work on that." And my brother and me used to go, "Yeah, sure, yes, Dad, yes, Dad." So you scroll forward 50 years or so, and one of my brother's many eclectic works, he was doing everything, but he was working very hard at the Classic Flight at Coventry. And there was an air show there where they actually had the very Canberra that gained the record. It was now on static display, of course, but it was there with its little plaque next to it. And my brother invited my old dad and myself along to the air show. And when we arrived, my dad looked over and he said, "Good Lord, I think that's my Canberra. I think that's my Canberra." So Jem and me did the usual, "Yeah, sure, Dad." And there was a party of other people, other old men gathered around this aeroplane, which had only just arrived at Coventry. So we walked over and my dad was looking at it. And one of these old men looked over and he kept looking at my dad and he said, "Excuse me, are you Frank Shaw?" And Dad said, "Yes." "Oh my God, it's Frank, it's Frank." And this was the team that had worked on the Canberra, and all these years, my brother and me had been going, "Yeah, sure, Dad."
So you're eating humble pie now.
He did. It was absolutely true. Frank Shaw was one of the principal engineers on this aeroplane.
Wow, amazing.
Mm.
It's funny, the old air show thing. I mean, I was struck a little bit by what you said right at the beginning about Birmingham and the kind of lots of bomb sites and so on, even in the 60s. Because I don't think, I mean, obviously I was born in the early 60s, but I don't really remember that at all from where we lived at, because we sort of moved down to Sussex, and I don't remember there was clearly more stuff around that's now gone because it's been developed out. But the rebuilding of the cities, the fact that the war had finished, nigh on 20 years prior to that, and we're still in that stage, it's an interesting reflection, isn't it, in terms of how long it does take to come out of these things if you get into them, not least when you look at the kind of geopolitical world we're living in today. But I mean, interesting. Another little anecdote on air shows. As you know, I flew for a couple of years on the Battle Britain Memorial flight, which was a great privilege. And one of the Hurricanes they've got there, I have an old slide, a 35mm slide of my father's that he took at an air show, which is of the same Hurricane. That we're still flying on the BBMF, and which is again, is one of little kind of odd connection, but it's fascinating that that Hurricane is still flying around and still doing very well today. Thank you very much, which is lovely. So it's a good thing that we're preserving some of these pieces of history for sure.
Do you have a preference of which of the two great ones to fly, Hurricane?
Oh, that's a question everybody asks, and I think it's really difficult because as you will well know, and I was going to come on and talk to you about this, but we'll dive down that rabbit hole now about World War II stuff. I mean, I think more Hurricanes, they got more kills. The pilots that flew Hurricanes were, I think, always quite upset, and until there were very, very, very few of them left now, I think. But when there were more of them around, they always used to get upset about the Spitfire lobby, that the Spitfire got all the credit and all the praise, and the reality was that the Hurricanes had done more. And it was a great privilege to fly both. The interesting thing is you can see very quickly why the Hurricane didn't have anything like as much onward development. It's nowhere near as sleek an aeroplane to fly. Same engine, but very different wing chord, wing thickness, and that makes the aerodynamics very, very different. So it is, I mean, I'm being oversimplistic now, but it's like a cart horse, racehorse comparison. You get in a Spitfire, immediately it's a Spitfire. It's an incredibly nimble aeroplane. So it was lovely to fly them. That we also, I mean, we had a Mark II, a Mark V, a Mark IX, and two Mark 19s when I was flying there. And so you had a kind of full range of most of the development of the Spitfire, which was great to experience. God, it was a challenging airplane though. It was. There was a reason why we trained on the Hurricane first. We did 25 hours on the Chipmunk as a 2-seat trainer. Last 10 of which you did in the back seat, just so you could actually work up to having a slightly more restricted view and so on that you've got when you then got in either the Hurricane or the Spitfire. And then we flew the Hurricane first because it's got a wider undercarriage, it's got a bigger fin and rudder, so it's much more aerodynamically stable on the ground, and easier to land and easier to control on the ground, particularly. Whereas the Spitfire, particularly the early marks of Spitfire, have got a very small fin and rudder and therefore are very directionally unstable on the ground, and the Tesco's shopping trolley for an undercarriage. So if you're not extremely careful, particularly on wheel, we tend to land most of the time these days on hard runways, on tarmac runways. And if there's any crosswind at all, they're very, very fickle, and you have to be really on your game to keep it straight going down the runway. And it was the thing I think all of us tensed up about, at the end of whatever sortie you're flying about. Well, what's the wind? Because we flew with those, we called them the baby Spitfires, the Mark II and the Mark V, which were the most challenging. And we had a 10-knot crosswind limit that we flew with. There are some private owners that fly with higher crosswind limits than that for sure, but for us, we very deliberately kept it low because they're very, very precious airplanes. When the Mark II flew in the Battle of Britain, it's an incredibly precious airplane.
I've seen it. Yes.
Well, I know, and obviously you did all that work on the Lancaster and so on as well, didn't you? In terms of and having flown in the Lancaster, you're one of the privileged few that's done that.
I actually logged 50 minutes.
Yeah, I know, it's amazing. That's...
In the front, I mean, obviously under supervision, but yeah, it's in my logbook as.
Yeah, I mean, you've done TV shows, haven't you, on exactly this sort of stuff? Tell us a bit about that.
This was a documentary about the Dam Busters raid, and apart from all of the associated stuff and the very embarrassing sortie that we did with the blades, the XREF blades, and we obviously weren't able to use the Lancaster, but we used a fast twin, and with one of the blades flying on our wing, and we were to recreate the raid, we were to test out the bomb site, the famous arm's length bomb site, and then fly to the Myrna Dam and do all of that stuff. Now, when we did the sortie to the Myrna, I was supposed to navigate. Never, ever, ever has that been my strong suit. In fact, it's by far, as a very junior pilot, navigation was at the bottom of my list of accomplishments. So that was embarrassing, being so bad at navigating to the Myrna Dam, but it's all on camera. The best part was when we went to Cambridge, where the BBMF Lancaster was, but it was having work done by marshals. And the captain of the Lancaster said, "Come and join the briefing." And so we were in the briefing. He said, "So what would you most like out of this?" And I said, "Well, you mean apart from flying in Lancaster, I'd like to actually fly a Lancaster." And I said that as a joke. So we got in, I did all, had all the stuff, I got my bone dome on, and he said, "Once we're in the air, feel free, just have a look around." So I occupied most of the positions, if not all, dorsal turret, and then into the tail.
You got into the tail, did you?
Yeah.
Oh yeah, because I can't, I could never get in there, too big.
No, well, you're much bigger than I am. So, I mean, the lifetime highlights, for instance, sitting in the dorsal turret and doing a classic double take of looking out to the left, and there was a Spitfire on our wing because we were on our way to do the display at the coast where a lot of veterans were gathered around the memorial. So, having as a child made airfix models of everything, including the Lancaster, and going through agonies of wonderment. What's it like inside? Because I was meticulously painting the outside, but I wanted to know what. I just had to put it down to my imagination. And then suddenly, all these years later, I was actually inside one and flying in one, doing maneuvers, watching it from the dorsal turret. When the display was over, the captain said, "Right, Martin, would you like to come up front?" "Oh, wow, yes." So I went up front, and he put down, the little seat that comes down. And I sat in that, and I thought, this is extraordinary. And then he said, "Right, you have control." Okay. Shit, he means it. So I said, "Do you mind if I just get the feel?" He said, "No, of course not. Of course." So I just twitched the rudder very, very slightly so I could just see if it was a ruddery aeroplane.
It's like the Queen Mary, really, isn't it? You move the controls, and 5 minutes later, something happens.
Yeah, very delicately. This wonderful, great big trim wheel. So I just checked the trim. Okay, I'm happy with that. All the time, Stuart was watching me, looking at me like that. And he said, "Right, give me 25 to the right." Okay, 25 to the right. That felt okay. Nose on the horizon nicely, straightened up. "Give me 25 to the left." Did that. And he said, "Right, you know what you're doing. Take us back to Cambridge." Well, at this point, we were in Kent on the coast. And he let me fly it all the way back to Cambridge, including some course changes. And I think probably, for people who have a broader or perhaps even a more religious perspective on life, I can honestly say that it was probably the highlight of my entire life so far.
Fantastic. It is. I mean, for those who are listening or watching who are not really aware of this, I mean, the Battle Britain Memorial Flight Lancaster is one of only two airworthy Lancasters in the world. The other one is in Canada. And it is a really special airplane to fly. And they tend to fly pretty much everywhere at about 1,000 feet because it's got 4 engines. So you can operate pretty safely, knowing that even if you have a bird strike or something down at low level, you're going to be fine. And of course, it's a flying display wherever it goes. I mean, it literally, everyone looks up, and it's one of those absolutely head-turning airplanes. And inside it is also a real experience, because I think you get to feel, and you'll have seen this, Martin, won't you, that you're climbing over this obstacle course inside the aeroplane to get anywhere in it, because you have to climb over the main spar, then you're climbing over the flap, jack, which is this huge thing that crosses across the right across the fuselage. And every time I got in it on the ground or in the air when I was at Coningsby, I used to think, just imagine what it must have been like for those men, and they were all men, obviously, in those days, at night when that aeroplane was burning and on its way down, and you're trying to get out of it. Which is, it's not surprising so many of them didn't, because at the end of the day, it was built as a bomb truck. It was built to carry, lots of bombs, and did that extremely well. But ergonomically, in terms of managing the people inside it, it definitely wasn't up for that, really. And it's an incredible privilege to have any time in there. I've done, I think I did 4 trips total. One of which was actually, we were doing one of the poppy drops down the Mall. And it wasn't intended to be on that. I was due to be elsewhere, and we had, it goes back to your question about Hurricanes and Spitfires. Actually, we had 2 Hurricanes, and at that stage we had 5 Spitfires on the flight, and we were due to be doing what we call a Lancaster Hurricane Spitfire, so an LHS fly past down the Mall. And the Hurricane that was going to go and do that was, had a technical problem and was broken, and they were all flying out of Duxford to go down to London. And I was up in Liverpool. I was doing a display up in Liverpool with the other Hurricane. Was told, no, we need you back, because we can't possibly put 2 Spitfires and the Lancaster down, because this was back in 2005, when obviously there were lots of veterans still around. And they would have been absolutely apoplectic if we'd gone down with two Spitfires and no Hurricane. So we had to get the other Hurricane down, and it meant I landed at Duxford and then lost my ride home, as it were, because my aeroplane is now being, was doing this display, which they, worked up separately and I wasn't part of. So they said, "All right." I jumped in the Lancaster, and I was sat in that mid-upper turret on the Lancaster for the poppy drop, which was again an experience I'll never forget. It was absolutely fabulous. It was amazing, and I think as well, just before I hand it back to you, the impact on the public, but also the impact on the veterans, was something to behold with that aeroplane. I mean, I did a trip once to Teesside in the Lancaster again with a chap called General Sir Graham Lamb, who's a fantastic army general who had a trip, and he was really looking forward to doing this, and was on the ground when we landed. We landed there to do the unveiling of a memorial for a chap called Andrew Minarski, who was a Canadian mid-upper gunner, actually, who'd won a Victoria Cross during the Second World War. And and a load of Canadians had come across for the unveiling of this memorial. They'd been based out of Teesside, and the emotion that the aeroplane invoked in some of the veterans, just as it flew over the top, and then when they were able to go and turn around and talk to the crew and everything else, it was really very, very powerful to see that, just what an impact it did have. And again, for me, it's testament to why we still do this with these airplanes, and we still fly them, because there are plenty of people out there who advocate, oh, they should be in museums, they're too precious to fly. And I'm completely of the opposite view. I mean, I think they're built to fly. Then that's what we should be doing for them.
Yes, I couldn't possibly agree more. Every time I was at Duxford, actually, just a few days ago, in the posh hangar, with all the lovely aeroplanes in, and I'm thinking of moving my aeroplane there. They've invited me to put it there. And however many times I've been in that hangar, I still have this deep, deep sense of awe. And all those other associated emotions, respect, and gratitude, that what people have done, and at what age they did it. And it's also it's very difficult not to slip easily into the old fart syndrome of, well, look what they were then, and look what our 20-year-olds, 18-year-olds are like now, en masse, So, yes, the whole area of the Second World War and the aeroplanes that were in it have a very, very deep interest and emotional impact on me.
Yeah, I'm going to come back to your airplane in a minute. I think to your point, though, about that and what they achieved, one of the things that always struck me flying the Spitfire and the Hurricane was we flew obviously with modern helmets with active noise reduction on our modern helmets. So we're actually suppressing a lot of the noise with modern radios because we had to have those, and very few other things were modern. The vast majority of the airplane was essentially as it was. But we also flew and continue to fly with vastly reduced engine power to preserve the life. So you display with probably about a third of the total available engine power that you've got on the airplane, and power relates directly to noise. So I cannot imagine for a second how, in the heat of combat, these guys were able to hear anything because it's an incredibly loud airplane. And when you do the workup and the training on the flight, when you do your certainly what we used to do was chipmunk flying. Then we did a couple of trips into Harvard, which that was contracted. We bought that down at Duxford just to give a bigger airplane to go and land on grass and hard runways and in the front and the back. And then we got in the Hurricane. And before you flew the Hurricane, you did a so-called strap-down engine run. So they literally tie the tail down to a hard point, and it's how we do engine tests and so on as well. And then you can start it up, and you can run it all the way up to takeoff power, display power setting, effectively, with it not going anywhere because it is tied down and can't move. And it gives you that sensory experience of what it's like before you actually then go and take it into the air and even taxiing it out. And it is a complete sensory overload. I mean, no question about it. So the respect point for what people did was just, it was amazing. But you've had really old airplanes. I mean, you used to have a Stearman. You've got a Cub these days. Tell us a bit about your own kind of flying journey from what you've done, because I suspect that's a side of you a lot of people don't know much about.
Sure. Well, because of, as I've explained, my background, from where I lived, and my dad's interest in airplanes. And I think somewhere in the early 80s, probably around 1982, the BBC were doing a documentary series called A Sporting Chance, where they asked TV people to learn something moderately difficult, and then see them learning on camera. Billy Connolly did horse riding. I think Susie Quattro did shotguns, clay pigeon. And they said, what would I like to do? And I said, I'd like to learn to fly. And they said, that's too expensive. But what about learning to glide? Learning to fly a sailplane? Yeah, I'll do that. So I had another lifetime's incredible privilege, because I didn't know at the time, until I started reading his books. I was taught by a man called Derek Piggott. And Derek Piggott was then, and is now, a legend. He had flown during the war, but his particular expertise was with sailplanes. He'd had the world altitude record and so on. The challenging thing for me was, because that was, as it was on TV, I had the schedule in front of me. So day one was the familiarization flight. And at the end of the week, it said, Martin goes solo. Oh, okay. We also lost 2 days because of weather. So in the end, Derek Piggott got me doing my first solo after 4 days. But it was astonishingly interesting, exciting, and working with someone who was an artist and a craftsman in an aeroplane. I know, having spoken to sailors, that you can't see the wind. There are lots of things you can't see, but a lot of it is just by intuition and by feel. And a lot of times I'd be flying with Derek Piggott, and the altimeter was going down a bit, and he wanted to maximize the time we had in the air. So he would say, fly straight ahead for a little bit. Hard over right, hard, pull, straighten. Go ahead, no, hard left, pull, straighten. Now, gentle turn, hold it there. And suddenly we were going up at 200, 300, 400 feet a minute. And I would say, now, how did you know that thermal was there, Derek? He said, oh, I don't know. just felt it.
Decades of experience.
Yeah,
Yeah. Yeah.
absolutely. But this is the kind of man who, for instance, when he got the world altitude record for a sailplane, he decided, and you as a distinguished pilot, you will know this. But for those who don't know, there are things that you stay away from in a light aeroplane, significantly a thunderhead.
Mm-hmm.
And the energy inside one of those is something akin to a small nuclear bomb. And so Derek decided that the best way to gain sensational altitude would be to fly his sailplane into the middle of the anvil, into the middle of the storm. So in his book, he said, we started going up at a very, very satisfying rate. He said, but then, yes, as you would, and like you would, Derek, he said, then I noticed, unfortunately, that the controls had frozen. He said, at this point, I wasn't particularly worried because I knew that when we topped out, eventually we would have to come down again, and that eventually the controls would unfreeze of their own accord, which indeed they did. So without oxygen, I think it was something like, I mean, it's been exceeded now, but with oxygen and with a lot of modern help. But in an ordinary 1960s, I think, sailplane, he did 17,500 feet with an airplane whose controls are completely frozen.
Yeah, and no
Waited
oxygen.
patiently
Yeah.
for it to unfreeze when he got down into warmer air. So this is the kind of man who was teaching me. He also used to do film flying, stunt flying. And apparently there's a famous crash sequence in a film called Via Rides about Pancho Villa, where in their sublime ignorance, the producer and the director asked him to fly over the sea towards a cliff and then crash the aeroplane, which was a mocked-up tiger moth to look like an SE-5. Crash it just before it hit the cliff. So Derek said, well, it's not like a car where you have brakes. If I'm flying towards the cliff at 0 feet and you want me to crash on the beach just before the cliff, there are certain physical problems there about slowing it down in a way that we can predict. And he worked it out. And he worked it out by loosening the bolts on the undercarriage and attaching them to a system of cables inside the cockpit, whereby he could fly towards the cliff, fly towards the beach, which had been loaded with disguised bags and stuff to slow it down, and then stall it, and then at the last minute, pull the wire, and the undercarriage would come off the moment he hit, and then slide along the beach towards the cliff and stop within feet of the cliff.
It's not exactly without risk, though, is it? That's crazy.
No. He also
Oh,
had to
my
fly.
goodness.
He also had to fly a First World War aeroplane through a bridge in the film The Blue Max, the very famous sequence. And at first he said, no, it can't be done because I think there was only something like 2 feet clearance on either side. And he said, I can't judge that laterally. And then he worked out a way to do it because he got surveyors to determine the exact center of the bridge. And then he had surveyors' poles set in the distance so that he had to line up the nose on these poles and ignore the wings either side and just line up on these poles. And he did.
Oh my goodness. That's like there was a World War II thing called a piece of cake where they did that with a Spitfire where they flew it under a little bridge. And
that
it was
was
a little
Ray Hanna, wasn't it?
It was, and it was a little bridge, and I'm slightly apocryphal, but the story I heard was they asked him to do another take, and he said, "You gotta be kidding! If you didn't get it that time, I'm not doing another one." Because that was
like
really tight. I mean, you watch you watch the film footage, you go, "Whoa, oh God, that's close." But then, so what took you from that into sort of that ignited your interest, and then you went into PPL and doing your own flying, yeah?
Well, I carried on gliding for a few years, and I was offered a job here in Norfolk. And as you probably know, I mean, you can't fly for more than 7 minutes in Norfolk without bumping into an airfield
Mm.
or a military base. And one of the cameramen on the series that I was working on was a PPL. And we got chatting, and he said, "Well, why don't you do your PPL while you're here? Because there's loads of flying clubs here, and you can come to mine." And I said, "Well, I'm only really interested in tail draggers." And he said, "That's fine." So we went to Shipton, which used to be a B-24 base during the war, where they had a cub, and I did my PPL on that. And so everything that I did right from the start was on a tail dragger, apart from the instrument section of the PPL, where I was on a PA-28, which has got a few more instruments. I mean, the cub has fewer instruments than my watch. You know?
Yeah, not really built for flying around in clouds, is it?
No.
But that's
Although,
another amazing thing about the wartime generation. I mean, they were doing that. They were flying the airplanes with very primitive instruments at night in cloud, and you go, oh my goodness. I mean, I look at it through today's lenses of the way we operate. It's extraordinary, absolutely extraordinary what they could do in those old airplanes.
absolutely incredible. I mean, my instructor, magnificent pilot, and he had been a nav. He'd been a backseater in the Air Force, and then had also transferred to the Fleet Air Arm in Sea Vixens. And so we did some of that when I had no idea what was happening, because I remember one day when the cloud cover was very low, and he said, "Well, we don't want to waste time. Let's just go and do our work on top." So I had no idea that you couldn't really properly do this in a cub, but we did. But I did ask him about it later when I learned a lot more, because it took me a year, because I was doing it through the winter. And so it took me a year to get my PPL. But I did say, "How did we do that?" And he said, "Well, I could see where the sun was, because I could see even through the clouds. I got a picture of where the sun was. So I just triangulated the wing strut and my right shoulder and the sun. And as long as I kept that, I knew I was flying straight and level, or flying level anyway."
Mm.
And so he used that to go up and down.
Yeah, wow.
Probably
Yeah,
uh,
punchy. It is, again, for those who are less familiar with flying, I suppose, listening or watching this. I mean, instrument flying, where you're actually looking at the dials in the cockpit. I mean, it's a real skill, and B, it's really important, because if you're flying through clouds or in clouds, then your body deceives you very, very quickly, and you'll get terribly disorientated. And many a pilot has crashed as a result of that, by getting severely disorientated, thinking that they've got their head in the right space, and that they're straight and level, and actually they're not. They're in a turn. And or a descent, and that can be pretty dramatic, and it is. I mean, you've done it, Martin, as well. I mean, it's definitely requires you quite a lot of work sometimes in cloud, to make sure you focus on the instruments, you believe the instruments, your body's telling you something completely different. I mean, have you experienced that? Have you had a kind of significant disorientation?
Fortunately not. No, I've not, but only because I've never attempted it on my own.
We used to
I
get it, I
thought,
mean, a lot, particularly in things like formation. If obviously, because you're looking out the window, formating on somebody else, and then
hmm,
you'd actually your body would be, you'd be thinking, right, I'm flying along, I'm completely straight and level, and you'd look in and you realize you're actually not. You're in a 30-degree bank turn, and
hmm.
it does take some getting used to it. It's a weird sensation, but the whole believing your instruments thing was very, very important.
Well, I've read enough about it to have religiously avoided getting myself into that situation.
Yeah,
And
which good for
the
you,
only
because lots of
time,
private pilots don't. I mean, I think that's the trouble some of the time, is people think they've got got a private pilot's license, and that's it. They've cracked the problem, and the reality is it's you've got an awful lot of stuff still to learn.
but what's the figure? Isn't it something like horrendously quick? Like it's only like 15 seconds.
Oh yeah, yeah, you can get disorientated very quickly. We used to do a thing when we did our aviation medicine training, and you do it fairly routinely, particularly if you were away from flying for a bit and had to go back and do any kind of refresher. You went back and you did things like hypoxia training. So you'd work in the decompression chamber with take the oxygen mask off and get the sense of what you were feeling as you sort of appreciated you were running out of oxygen, to hopefully be aware of those symptoms so you could get yourself on emergency oxygen. But we also do a disorientation chamber, and they put you in this little box, which yours a totally dark box. You're sat in it, and it rotates, and it has instruments, very basic instruments, that show you what the box is doing, and they can, outside the box, they can turn those on and off. So, and you're on intercom as well, and it's in a room, so you're talking to the rest of your classmates, who always thought this was very funny, because you're then in the box. The box is turning around, and and you're watching the instruments. Then they turn the instruments off, and they'll say to you, right, what do you think's happening now? And you'll be coming out with some complete garbage about what you're doing. And the reality is, of course, they then turn it back on and show you you're actually still spinning, probably even faster. And it's really powerful, because it does show you very, very clearly that it's all to do with your middle ear and the little hairs and the way your balance mechanisms work and so on. That actually, when you exert force on those, initially you feel that, but if you're then stable but in a spin, then actually the hairs then stabilize, because they say, well, actually, do you know what? I'm not turning anymore, because there's no additional G-force being applied, and it can be very, very dangerous. It's why one of the reasons, anyway, that carrier launch pilots, so guys getting airborne off aircraft carriers, keep their hands off the controls when they get airborne, because you get this thing called pitch up illusion. Yeah, if you watch any film of carrier operations, they will always have this hand, the right hand will be up on usually on the coaming, completely out off the stick, because as you launch, you get such a strong acceleration moment that you think your body tells you you're actually pitching up dramatically, and so your instinct, if you're not careful, is to push down, which is not a good thing when you've just come off the end of the boat. So you need to be disciplined about how you're managing that.
That's great to know that. That's a question I've often had, having watched YouTube about everything about airplanes. Yes, I have noticed that, the hand on the coaming.
Yeah. And it's a real thing. It's it's all part of it, because obviously that acceleration is extreme. I mean, you're going on a catapult launch from in very, very short distance. It's firing you off the end of the carrier at takeoff speed. So and it's got to get you to that to make you flyable. I've done that in the carrier onboard delivery, but facing backwards in a sort of truck to get onto the carrier, which is interesting to do, the arrested landing and the catapult launch. I would love to have done that in a fast jet. It would have been a lot of fun to do that, but no, never had that privilege. I'd like to take you back to acting just for a minute, because I think there's a few things in there that, I mean, you mentioned obviously you don't consider yourself a leader, but you've played a lot of roles where you are in leadership capacity. So when George Gently would be a good example, as a police inspector or as a judge in Judge John Deed. I'm interested in what you do to get yourself into those kind of characters. What kind of research do you do? How do you actually get to a place where you're feeling you can really carry that off? And actually what you've learned from it as well, in terms of the different behaviors you've seen along the way from different people. How does that feel?
It all comes down, as with everything, I think, to the material that you're given. And I was fortunate, because both with George Gently and with Judge John Deed, they were beautifully written. And so you don't really have to do very much. I think from my own observation, because part of the job of being an actor is to watch, observe, and bring in what you receive from people.
Mm-hmm.
And that sort of goes into an unconscious record, and you just notice stuff. So you tend to notice people who are impressive, for instance, and then you notice people who are not. And you can notice people who are trying too hard. And you don't want to do that if you're a leader. You don't want to be trying too hard. You don't want to be trying to please your subordinates too much, and so on and so on. So by a process of osmosis, this comes along. And then you've also got the brilliance of the writing. And I find mostly, if you just say the words and tell the truth and you get yourself out of the way, the biggest problem I think that anybody faces with an actor, as an actor, is to get oneself out of the way and not worry about, am I doing this well? How am I being received? Do I look okay? Oh God, I've just caught a glimpse of the monitor and I look like shit and all that stuff. It's absolutely, it has to go, because the moment it intrudes, you're sunk.
Mm. Yeah, I can imagine that.
Yeah. And then the other thing is to just be constantly, all of the time, and after 60 years I remained there, to be in a place of learning. Watching, learning, watching, learning. Now, I've been incredibly lucky because I have been around some incredibly impressive actors. So as I said, when I left drama school, I went into rep, and I went to Hornchurch Rep in 1965, 60 years ago. And I was an assistant stage manager, which basically means make this fucking tea. Fresh. And make props. And just do everything and anything apart from walking on the stage and creating a role. That's very challenging, but it's a brilliant apprenticeship, because, it's like if you want to learn to be a blacksmith, all right, well then shovel that where the horses have been.
Mm-hmm.
And that's your start, and it's starting to be the blacksmith. In fact, my very first job as an assistant stage manager at Hornchurch was when the stage manager said, "Great, welcome aboard. Now we've got an old prop store across the road at the White Hart, and it hasn't been opened for 30 years. So here's the key, open it, and bring me back an inventory of the props that we've got stored there and clean it up." So I had to laugh. I really had to laugh, because once I'd been in there 20 minutes, I realized that my first job as an actor or post-drama school was literally shoveling shit. That was my first job, because not having been opened, this ancient storeroom in a very old pub was that deep in rat droppings.
Yeah, I can imagine. Probably all sorts of things.
That was my first job. Eventually, I got to literally being a walk-on on stage. And this is where the learning curve went like this. Because I had a single bed sit in a house where there were 2 levels below, with larger rooms which were also let. And a young actor came to join the company called Anthony Hopkins. And he is unbelievably impressive now. At the age of 28, amazingly, he was equally impressive, equally charismatic. And so he only lasted for 2 plays at Hornchurch before he was snatched by Laurence Olivier's National Theatre. But I thought, how is he doing this? How is he doing this? Because he doesn't look like he's doing anything. And yet he's completely magnetic and extraordinary. And he took one of the rooms in this house below mine, where everybody shared a kitchen. And at that time, he was a very heavy drinker. And at that time, so was I. And so after the performances, we would sit down talking about acting and putting down some cheap wine. And I said, what is it? What do you do? And he said, now, it probably doesn't make any rational sense the way I say it, but to me, it did. He said, you have to displace your own weight in air when you walk on the stage. And it really, really resonated with me somehow. And so the next night, I had to walk on with my 2 lines. And I didn't just walk on and say them. I walked on and went and took the space and displaced my own weight in air, I think. And it's something that I carried on doing for 60 years.
Mm.
And it has to do, I think, with that, with having the confidence to be still. So stillness, if you have confidence, is a sort of magnetic quality. And not being too busy, but also occupying and owning that space. And that was something that I learned from Anthony Hopkins, basically just in a sentence, and have carried through ever since.
Yeah, fantastic. It's amazing how those small moments can make a really big difference, isn't it, in terms of things that really have a lasting impact on you.
Indeed, yes. But I was fortunate in that it made sense, because I think if you just say it as an acting text, if you like, or as teaching young actors, displace your weight in air, most people are going to say,
What?
yes, that's an awful lot of air. And so I'm going to get scientific on you. So, but to me, it made sense. And
Yeah,
simply because I had thought that acting was about demonstrating, imitating, rather than simply taking the space and being. Just get there and have the courage and the confidence to be what you're supposed to be.
yeah. When you are, because clearly, I mean, some of the stage roles you've played, and I've seen you in, are kind of either fictional or historic. Whereas, obviously, if you're doing a John Deed or a George Gently, where you're playing a kind of a fictional character, but in a real role, as it were, you've got to portray that realism of the police or the judiciary. I mean, do you have judges who come and provide advice, or do you go and sit in courtrooms and watch judges, or how do you get yourself really into the kind of making it fully feel as, because it really does. I mean, I've watched both those shows, and I think you absolutely come across, having sat in some courtrooms as well and to work with a bit with the police. You nail it, and I'm just wondering how you get that kind of level of authenticity into what you're doing.
First of all, by being I mean, since you've used the word authenticity, I'm pretty anal about authenticity. One of the things that irritates me when I watch films and TV that they're not authentic is that they're not authentic. You know, that the researchers, that the people have not taken the trouble to actually get it right. You know, now, as a distinguished pilot, you must have seen lots of things about flying and gone, oh,
Yeah. You get it.
But usually it's because they just haven't bothered to do the research because they think nobody's going to notice. And indeed, perhaps even if 90% of the people don't notice, it means that you are not honoring your craft in taking the trouble to do it properly. Now, when it came to Judge John Deed, the script was passed through chambers, a distinguished barrister's chambers. And we had a working, on her feet barrister who was with us all through the courtroom scene. But nevertheless, because of my own research, I was constantly finding areas in the script where I would say, no. And sometimes the barrister on duty would go, and I'd see her, and I'd see her go like that. And I would stop and say, what's the problem there? And she said, well, that wouldn't happen. And that's the point where I would take the risk of being difficult and say, can we just stop, please? This is not accurate. Can we change it? Occasionally it made me a little unpopular, but the producer, Gordon Newman, was an extraordinary, inspirational man. He's done more work before Judge John Deed to change British television and perception of drama. And so he was the sort of man who would, first of all, with his producer's hat on, and say, no, we haven't got the time to mess around. No. And eventually he would say, thank you, you're right. As far as George Gently is concerned, well, I have the advantage of it being initially set in 1964. And so I was the only person on the set who was in 1964. and was, pretty much an adult in 1964. So I was able to put my feet down a fair bit about that. But really, everything comes down to the script.
Yeah, does it frustrate you then when you look at the sort of Hollywoodization of some things? I mean, I think they do have a bit of a fast and loose relationship with history some of the time with some of the movies that have been made, and even, I mean, I've got friends. I personally love the two Top Gun movies. I think they're fantastic, and I really enjoyed them. I think they're terrific entertainment. You can for sure in both of them pick quite big holes in, if you're going really, yeah, if you're being really picky about the flying and some of the dialogue. And I mean, one of the classics is in a flat spin, he's heading out to sea, is I think one of the ones that leaps to mind, that if you're in a flat spin, you're not heading anywhere, you're going straight down. But there are those sorts of things which, yes, there you can take them as irritants, and some of my friends do definitely find it. They say, I can't watch them; it's awful. I don't like the film. I'm the opposite. I love the entertainment factor of it, but I don't like it some of the time where they are historically completely inaccurate, and some of that's a bit of political correctness creeps in occasionally. Some of it's also just because I think maybe they haven't been bothered, or they want to actually actively change the dialogue around history, and that I think is a slightly risky thing to do if you're in that space.
Couldn't agree more. I'm absolutely with you on that. And that's really the only area, I think, where, dodging back to where we were on the subject of being difficult and leadership and so on, that is the only area where I will put my foot down. If other actors want to be difficult, then they can be difficult. And I will adjust, But I won't be involved in as far as I am able legally. I will not be involved in not telling the truth or being responsible or the front person for an inaccuracy.
Interesting.
Sometimes, reckless honesty can get you in trouble. I mean, there's something that I wanted to mention, actually, when you were talking about Olivier and your father, so I'm jumping around now. But when I was at LAMDA, at drama school in '63, it was an entirely different form of acting. RADA was still very much in the mode of anyone for tennis and drawing room comedy. LAMDA was much more about the method and the intensity and the reality. My years at LAMDA had more akin to a psychiatric encounter group than they had to do with actually acting. It was actually, things have softened a lot now, but that's where we were. And a lot of it was about what was then the modern way of method acting, of reality. Sometimes at the expense of discarding the actual craft. Can you be heard? Are you able to use diction properly? Do you use consonants? Can you use your voice without shouting? All of that stuff. That's part of the craft. But at the time, everybody was talking about Laurence Olivier's performance as Othello at the National Theatre as the greatest performance of all time. So I went to see it. And oddly enough, and I don't know why to this day, I remember blushing in the dark as a 19-year-old watching the greatest actor in the world performing arguably the greatest performance in the world. And I thought, it's all about externalism. He is doing the most sensationally brilliant, unarguably brilliant, imitation of a black man doing Shakespeare. And I carried that with me until years later, I was invited to join Laurence Olivier's National Theatre. And in a very, very significant leading role. And the director, Roland Joffe, who went on to be an Oscar-winning Hollywood director, he wanted me, and he said, right, you've got the job, but everybody has to meet Sir Laurence and audition for him. And I thought, oh Christ, okay, my arrogance. So I auditioned for Laurence Olivier, and I found instantly he was the most humorous, charming, polite, comfortable, delightful man. And we chatted for a bit. And he said, marvelous. He said, absolutely no problem. If Rowley wants you, Rowley's got you. I think you're going to be wonderful. Congratulations. And so I joined his company and was working with him. Now, I don't know how, or even if it didn't, maybe it was a coincidence, but maybe my opinion of his Othello 10 years before, or even more, had filtered through, because I was walking downstairs once and Olivier was walking upstairs, and he stopped on the landing to have a rest. And as we passed, he said, "Oh, I couldn't play Othello anymore." And I made the usual joke. I said, "Oh, yeah, of course you could." And as I went past, he grabbed me by the arm and he pulled me very close and he said, "I wasn't very good in that, was I?" Now he had been regarded as even then, the greatest actor of all time, doing the greatest performance of all time. And I thought, recklessly, he would go reckless honesty. I thought, oh, okay. So I said, "I thought you were a lot better in the film." "Ah," he said, and then pulled me even closer and said, "Which scene?" So again, I told the truth. And there is a scene at the end of the film where Othello kills himself in the play. But Othello, Olivier had a little dagger set into his bracelet. It clicked. In close-up, stabs himself in the neck, and then performs his dying speech, which is extraordinary. So he said, "Which scene?" I said, "The scene with the bracelet, your dying speech." And then he leaned forward and he patted my cheek and he said, "Good boy." Then carried on his way.
Priceless. What a great memory.
He was the most lovely, supportive, fabulous boss to work with.
Yeah, that is amazing. That is absolutely terrific, isn't it? What a lovely story.
We did another play, an Italian play, where it was a large company, and he was playing an old Italian man, it was like a peasant. And there was a scene where he had a line where he had to say, "And if Rocco is not sitting at this table on Sunday, then neither is Don Antonio del Piscopo," and then walk off stage. And this was just before I had to walk on. And I was standing in the wings watching him. And he said, "And neither is Don Antonio del Piscopo," walked off stage. And I was laughing. And when he walked off, grabbed me in the wings, he said, "What are you laughing at?" And I said, "Well, you sound like us doing a bad imitation of you playing Richard III." He thought that was hilarious, so he walked off in his dressing room laughing. So the next night, I was waiting to come on. And as he said the line, he said, "Then neither is Don Antonio del Piscopo," punched his shoulder and looked off to the wings. So immediately, collapses start party. I was like this, but how am I going to walk on laughing? So as he walked off, he looked at me and went, "Gotcha, didn't I?" But in the succeeding week, the wings got more and more crowded as the other actors in the play
wanted to see what was going to happen next.
And he got more and more outrageous every night.
Yeah.
"And if Rocco is not the full Richard III, neither is Don Antonio del Piscopo." So even that he could manage to do without making it look ridiculous on stage. But that was an age of acting where if you were a great actor, you could do that. But in my not so humble opinion, his greatness was less in inhabiting the character and more in demonstrating the character.
Yeah. Okay. Very, very interesting. I presume as well those kind of little, games and tricks get played quite a lot, particularly on the stage, do they? Where you'll see if you can, not trip up necessarily, but create the conditions where it makes it a bit cheeky for you to walk on and follow, or is that?
It has been done. I'm not a fan of it, to be honest. I'm not a fan of it, but as you've probably gathered, I'm fairly anal about focus, about getting it right and honoring the writer and the work. I'm sure if you were working in a farce or something very light, then yes, that would be entirely possible. I mean, I have heard of a performance of Hamlet at the Royal Shakespeare Company Theatre in Stratford, where Gertrude at the end raises her glass and say, "The Queen toasts to thy success, Hamlet," and somebody had put a goldfish in it. So
Oh, no.
it does go on.
Yeah, that's priceless.
But
Absolutely.
I'm probably just a little bit too intense about the whole process.
Yeah, retribution is extreme, I'd imagine,
Oh
on the
yeah,
back of those sorts of things, that's for
it
sure.
can be. It can be.
Yeah, hell hath no fury and all that.
Yeah.
Of all the roles you played, Martin, what's the one that you've enjoyed the most?
I think Man for All Seasons is very much up there because I've now done it twice, as you know, and because I have a profound connection with the character of Thomas More. And also because the writing is so beautiful. And it's full of lines where you would say, "Oh, I wish I'd said that." But you get to say it, But the other one, because it was my first film and I was very young, and I worked with Roman Polanski in his seminal film of Macbeth, still probably one of the greatest film interpretations of a Shakespeare play, because Polanski was almost religious about authenticity. So it was set in the period. We had a big budget because in those days you could. So I enjoyed that because it embodied everything that I loved about the job. Shakespeare, authenticity, history, and it was like being in a time machine. Because if you could just focus out, especially when we were on location, the cameras and so on, you were actually in 1067. We had the horses, we had the weapons, the armor, the chainmail was real. And Polanski was the most extraordinary man to work for. So that was very much a highlight. But I've been very fortunate, there are been lots of favorites, but I would say those two probably, and also John Deed, because I've always had a fascination with the law. And also it was an opportunity to do something different, because I think hitherto judges had always been portrayed as the kind of old crone, who would say, "Beatles? What are the Beatles? I don't understand." And of course, that's entirely not reality. Judges are like you, ordinary, jokey people, but they know the law. And so I was able to play him, not as somebody who looked like a judge, but somebody who was a human being, with human fallibilities.
Yeah, and that really comes over, actually. It's a great series. I really enjoyed that when it was on. It's terrific.
And I did get to meet a lot of barristers, and I did get to meet a lot of judges. So I had plenty of material. So, But I mean, but once again, going back to the liberties that are taken, you will still see occasionally a portrayal of a courtroom drama, and the judge will have a gavel. There's never has there ever been a gavel in an English courtroom. Even a great film, I think it was called In the Name of the Father, which was about the trial of the Guildford Four. The barrister says to the judge, "May I approach?" Well, that's an American thing. Never happens in an English court.
Yeah, fascinating. You're right, because it's those little details that probably most people wouldn't notice that,
No,
but the
absolutely.
experts would. I mean, did you get much kind of feedback from the judiciary, as it were, in terms of your portrayal? Did they
Yes.
like you doing it?
Well, they loved it. I mean, they loved it to the extent that they gave me the most extraordinary honor of electing me an honorary bencher at Gray's Inn.
Wow.
Yeah,
Okay. Yeah,
the
yeah, yeah.
last time they did that was for Michelle Obama. Um, so, yes, that was an extraordinary honor. I don't know how serious they were because they would say, they all loved it. And they said, but the only really authentic thing about it is the sex. Oh, oh, okay.
Uh,
Okay.
brilliant.
And of course, there were one or two liberties because the number of times that John Deed's ex-wife or his putative mistress, Joe Mills, Jenny Seagrove, appeared before him was was a great deal more than would normally have
Yeah,
happened.
yeah, yeah, yeah. But I mean, you have to do that if you're gonna create the show, don't you? I mean, you
Yeah,
can't do anything else. Yeah, for
yeah,
sure.
yeah, yeah. But mostly, no, I think it was pretty authentic and more so than most.
So, Martin, we talked about the part you like the most. What about the one you like the least?
Okay, here we go. Well, sorry, everybody. I don't think it's a great secret, certainly not in the bad areas of the press. I was not happy doing The Professional, and that's unfortunate because it went on for 4 years. Um,
And I remember it well, and I've heard you say that before, and I was surprised when I first heard you didn't enjoy it because when I mean, I was young at the time, but I thought it was a great show.
yeah, yeah, and it meant a lot to a great deal of people. So before I go into the reasons I didn't like it, let me just say that the story has a happy ending. Because I was asked to do a guest role in the Avengers, which was very very big then,
Yep.
um, with the gorgeous, wonderful Joanna Lumley. In fact, as her boyfriend, and in fact, playing a jet fighter pilot.
Oh, there
Uh,
you go. What might have been.
well, again, as you can very well imagine, with utter bullshit, basically, about all aspects of the flying, insofar I was a villain. That the plan was to steal a missile, which I would fire into a prepared bank of sand, and then me and my accomplice would steal the missile from the stand, which of course hadn't been damaged. So the whole thing was cobblers. But anyway, this I enjoyed very much. And during the filming, the casting director said they were putting together a new series. Would I like to choose either of the two parts? Um, and on we went. So we started filming. We were filming playing the other part, playing Bodhi with a friend, a very close friend that I had managed to get into the cast. And the producers, who I have to say were not great people. They were not the kindest or most considerate people. And what they wanted was a very abrasive relationship between the two main characters. So after a week of filming, they thought that the relationship between myself and the then Bodhi was not as abrasive or uncomfortable as they would have preferred rather. And so they replaced him. And they replaced him with the one who eventually did the role for 4 years, Lewis. And I'm very sad to say we didn't get on. And there were lots of reasons for that, which I won't go into because it would be unkind to him as he's now no longer with us. But it was a very, very, very difficult time, both for the fact that Lewis and I didn't really get on, and also because the producers just didn't look after us the way they should have done.
Did the fact you didn't get on though, did that not play into what they were trying to create as an abrasive relationship?
No, I know. I mean, it's a very mistaken impression. As far as the job of acting was concerned, they were profoundly ignorant as producers. What you need to do is to make your artists comfortable. You know, namby-pamby or anything. Nobody particularly wants that, or maybe some do, but not me. But you create a comfortable working environment, where rather than you're lucky to be working, do as you're bloody well told, and a kind of casual indifference to one's needs. I mean, for instance, very quickly, very quickly, the series became an enormous hit, and we both became major pop star celebrities almost.
Mm.
But they didn't provide us with what even the most young newcomer on a film set will get, is a place to retire to. Now, if you're a star, you'll get a trailer. And if not, you get something called a three-way, which is a trailer which is divided into small cubicles. But there is a place for you to retreat to between takes. We didn't get that. So in the long periods where they were setting up and we were on location, we were inundated with people. There was nowhere to escape to. It was pretty horrible. They also managed to keep me out of work for 4 years because it's called being on hiatus. When a series is between series, while they're preparing the next one, there is a period of usually about 6 months where you're not filming, but where the contract usually will say you're on call and you have to get a release from the people that you're contracted to. It's always a very friendly, open relationship. In this case, every time I was offered a job, because at this point, when the professionals started, I was already very well established. I had the West End Theatre. I had several major TV roles. I had the Polanski movie. And so a lot of offers of work were coming in. But when, as we were obliged to do, we asked for a release to do this job, they would say, "Oh, no, I'm so sorry. We start filming in a month," which they didn't. And so they would keep me out of work, which they did for 4 years between the filming of
Yeah, that's a big hit. Yeah. And you had quite a distinctive hairdo, I seem to remember, in that series as well. So you would have been easily recognizable in something else.
Yes, I know. I mean, even policemen were having curly hair underneath their helmet. And football manager Kevin Keegan, for instance, he got on it. So no, it was a very uncomfortable time. The good news is that 10 years after it had finished, Lewis got in touch and said that he had been taking flying lessons. He'd just got married. They had a new baby. Could we meet up? And he came over to dinner, and we had a really, really nice evening together with him and his new wife and his new baby, which he was very proud of. And that was the last time I saw him.
Yeah. No, I'm glad you did have that reconciliation because it is very sad. Obviously, he passed away much too young. That's for sure.
Yes.
It's
So we had that reconciliation, and as far as the series was concerned, there was something else that radically changed in my core about the whole thing, because years after that, many years after that, I did another TV series, which was a medical drama. I was playing a trauma surgeon. And in one of the episodes, there was a drug dealer, a very, very large, very impressive black man. Lovely man, but an actor, obviously, not a real drug dealer. And I remember him walking onto the set on the first day, and he saw me. And he walked over and he said, "Man, it's such a joy to meet you. You're my childhood. You are my childhood." And I thought, oh, it actually meant a lot to a lot of people.
yeah. I think it did. It was a really big show. I remember it very, very well.
And then
It
he
was a great
also
show.
said, the thing that got me, he said, he said, you won't remember this. He said, but you were on location on the South Bank. And he said, and my dad brought me to the set because we heard you were filming there. And you had your motorbike there. Because sometimes I would, if the weather was nice, rather than have the car, I would ride myself to the location on my bike. And he said, and my dad came over and you were really kind to me. He said, and I was only little and you picked me up and you sat me on your motorbike. And he said, I remember that all my life and you are my childhood, man. And now I'm working with you. It's such an honor, such a pleasure. And the whole thing changed for me.
Yeah.
So all of that tension and resentment of those 4 years just melted away.
It's
So
very
yeah,
interesting, isn't it? How, on a broader level, with that kind of thing, how I think if I look back across my own life, about particularly in some of the more senior roles I've had, the unexpected influence you have on people with tiny little things that really resonate with them, which you didn't think anything of at the time. And that can cut both ways, of course. Is one of the things I make sure I try and train people about is, think about the fact that, it is the you never get a second chance to make a first impression approach. You need to be really careful about how you act and what you say and what you do, because it will have a profound impact on people. And I think people sometimes don't really think about that. And I know that's true for me as well. I mean, it's a lesson I've learned and therefore try and pass on to other people now, because I think it is so important. Particularly if you are in influential positions, it makes a really big difference.
absolutely. And so really, not that I've been ever remotely in the position of someone like yourself, who has to be the classic definition of a leader. My only experience of trying to be a leader in that one is the head of a company or the head of a caste is to lead by example.
Mm.
Um, and having been lucky enough to have worked with people like Gil and people like Olivier, they led by being nice to people, by being considerate of people, by listening to absolutely everybody, being patient, basically just being kind.
Yeah, yeah. No, I think it's a very underrated thing, isn't it? I think that the emotional impact you have on people by being nice to them, having sort of empathy for their feelings, not being too pompous and over the top. If you're particularly I'd imagine certainly in the kind of acting world, you could easily be in a position where you get up yourself a little bit because you are the big star, etc. And that must be really difficult to handle. I mean, you hear these stories. I don't know how many of them are kind of completely apocryphal about people being particularly picky about dressing room layout and those sorts of things. And I don't want any green M&Ms and
Yeah.
or whatever else. And although interestingly, I heard a lovely story. You maybe ought to put some color on this about. So I can't remember who it was saying it. Was on a TV show somewhere where they're saying, yeah, but one of the reasons that's not because I'm being particularly anal about it. Is what I want to do is I want to make sure someone's read the contract. Because actually, that's in the fine print of the contract. So therefore, if someone's actually, paid attention to that, then it shows they've actually paid, attention to all the other stuff that's in there. And I thought, well, okay, fair enough. I wasn't entirely convinced, but I thought it was an interesting point.
No, that's a very good point, and I've never thought of it that way, and I think it's entirely possible. But
Mm.
I was given a very, very fortunate, uncomfortable but fortunate lesson very, very early on in my career, because um, the vacation periods, as with all university type institutions, you get a very long vacation. And during the first vacation from my drama school, Lambda, I got a job as an extra on a very popular TV series of the time called Crossroads. And
Yeah, I remember that as well. Yeah.
yeah, well, it was shot in Birmingham. And I'd never been on the set of a TV series before. I had no idea what went on there. But I had done a fair bit of amateur theatre work, and so I was comfortable of being around actors. So I walked on the set on the first day and saw all these actors around. So I walked over to the leading lady and held out my hand and said, "How do you do? I'm Martin Shaw." And she looked at me literally as though I was a snail or a toad or something. And she looked through her dark glasses indoors and went, and then turned her back on me. And I was shocked and shamed by this behavior. Um, and so I went to another member of class and said, good morning, I'm Martin. How do you do? Exactly the same.
Wow, really?
Yeah, yeah. And no one would speak to me and nobody would say hello apart from one person. And I think he was the guy called Sandy. I believe he was in a wheelchair at some point. And he was very friendly and very nice. Oh, how do you do? No, I'm welcome. But apart from that, nobody else would speak to me. Because presumably I was an extra. And I made a little vow at that point. I said, if ever I make it in this profession, I will never, never put anybody through what I've just been through. And I stuck to that for the last 60 years.
Yeah, it is. I mean, it's the leading by example in reverse thing, isn't it? And I do exactly the same as that. I've had experiences, not identical to that one, but similar sorts of things where I've looked at people and gone, I really like what you do, or I really don't like what you do, and therefore I create my own kind of style and approach as a direct result of that. And I talk about that quite a lot when I do training with people, because again, I think that is inevitably how you pick some of this stuff up, and being aware of what you have been upset and hurt by and not doing it yourself is just as important as doing the kind of the right side of it as well, I think.
Mm-hmm.
So no, it's a really interesting example. Very sad that they were like that though. That's pathetic, really, isn't it?
It is pathetic, but it was one of the most valuable lessons. I mean, I
Mm.
think probably because of having been blessed with parents who had kindness and integrity in their nature, I wouldn't possibly have been kind anyway. But having had that personal experience and knowing how it felt, it's carried me all through my career. And I know, and I can see it, when you've been doing a job. I did George Dentley for 10 years. And so you get to know the crew very well. You get to know the cast very well. Lee Ingleby and me, we had an almost telepathic connection, and we were very good, very, very good friends. And so to come into that atmosphere of a hit show, and everybody knows, it must be, even everybody knows each other, it must be intimidating. So whenever a guest artist came on, even if they only had one line, I would make it my business to go over and ask their names and say, welcome, and is there anything you need? And it's nice to have you, and so on. And I think you can't work properly unless you have a nice, comfortable atmosphere, an
Mm.
atmosphere in which everybody can feel valued.
Yeah, no, totally great point. It must be really difficult when you finish a show like that, isn't it? I mean, that's almost like a bereavement.
Well, absolutely. Well, especially with that one, because it was 10 years of
Yeah.
him and myself and the rest of the cast winding each other up, so much because we were like family. I mean, the guy who played the sergeant, it's only a very small part, but he was a lovely man. And he had one scene where he had to come into my office and he had to say, oh, excuse me, sir, but Mr. Kanana Sundrian is waiting to see you. So take one, he walked in and he said, excuse me, sir, Mr. Kanana, oh, sod it. Cut, walked off, take two. Excuse me, sir, oh, bugger. So we got up to take 14. Take 14. And I was sitting behind the desk. We came in and he said, excuse me, sir, but Mr. Kanana Sundran is here to see you. And I said, who?
Which presumably
Oh,
wasn't
you
in the script.
bastard, you bastard, cut.
Oh, brilliant.
So, yeah, that was the kind of fun relationship we had. It was sometimes 12 or 14 hours a day, but we were mates going to work together, going to work with your best mates, and it doesn't get better than that.
Yeah, no, that's terrific. It really is terrific. there's a couple of things I always tend to ask people, but I think they're particularly applicable for what you've done because you've been doing it for so long. I mean, if you went all the way back to the beginning and you were able to turn around and talk to young Martin, at the outset, either still at school or just as you left, kind of thing. What with all you've learned and all the experience you've got, what advice would you be offering now?
I would say from a professional point of view, do all your research, make sure you know everything that you need to know. Make sure you know all the lines, all of the technical stuff, all of the professional stuff, so you won't have to be embarrassed. And then just chill, and just be yourself. Be as respectful as you possibly can to the people who are ahead of you, and later on be kind and aware with people who are coming up. And I think probably that's not just acting, that's life, isn't it?
Yeah, no, I totally agree with that. I think it's great advice that would be applicable to anyone.
Yeah,
And highs and lows, Martin. I mean, you talked about the Lancaster thing, and that I guess is a particularly memorable thing. But from a career point of view, what's been your high point?
well, we've been very fortunate because there are quite a few. I mean, there's the one I told you about, the Polanski movie. There was another one where I did a play called An Ideal Husband by Oscar Wilde. And it's a much deeper and more profound play because it's full of Oscar's witticisms and aphorisms and the usual Oscar Wilde stuff. And Peter Hall, of course, everybody knows what a great, great director he was. And right at the start, he said to us, when the people in Oscar Wilde's plays make their clever, witty remarks, it's because they have a deep feeling that they are trying to cover up. And that was a very, very useful thing. And it was why, when we did this production of Ideal Husband, it was an enormous hit, twice in the West End and once on Broadway. So one of the career highs was to walk into the theatre every night at the Haymarket and to see a plaque on the outside the theatre and saying, whatever the date was, I don't remember the exact date, but it said, the first production of Oscar Wilde's play, An Ideal Husband, opened here, such and such a 1901. So I was in the same theatre, which is unaltered since 1901, doing the same thing and standing in the same place on the stage where Oscar Wilde stood on the opening night and gave his languid speech to the audience. Then the other career highlight was when we transferred to Broadway and my agent phoned up and she said, congratulations, you've been nominated for a Tony Award.
Yeah, that would be definitely a career highlight. Yeah.
That was kind of nice, and the rest of them, it's just sprinkled with career highlights, sprinkled with them.
Yeah, well, you have had it. I mean, you've had a glittering career, so it is very difficult to to pick one, I'm sure. And that's a great list.
I mean, I remember one. I remember when we were shooting Macbeth, where the Scottish army was moving with the horses and so on, and we were shooting it in Wales, and it was a very, very dismal day, light rain, low cloud, and the army were up on a hill with a lot of horses. We had a budget, so we had about 300 horses, and I was sitting in the car waiting for a break for them to finish filming. And then over the walkie-talkie, it said, right, Martin, they finished filming. Can you get on your horse and come up and join us? Yeah, great. So I got on my horse, all on my own, took him across, and then started climbing this path up the steep hill in the mist, in the rain. And then coming down towards me were 300 people on horseback, and it was the Scottish army. And I could look around me and I could see nothing at all that wasn't appropriate for 1067. The weather, myself, what I was wearing, the smell of the horse, soldiers coming down with their spears and so on. And I thought, here is that time machine that I've always longed for. You know?
Brilliant. No,
Nothing
really, really
around
good.
here would look any different than it did, you know, 1,000 years ago. You know?
That must be fun to do that when you're properly in that kind of moment as well. I think that's got to be really good. I mean,
Yeah.
on a related point, I guess there's a question I was musing on when you were talking a minute ago. When you're on stage in particular, because obviously if you're doing a TV show, yes, you might have people turning up to watch it from the sidelines and so on, but they don't have any part in it. When you're on stage and the audience is there, how important is the audience to your production itself? And I mean, I don't just mean in terms of on your enjoyment of it, and clearly getting more applause and standing ovations has got to be great, but how much difference does it make to the atmosphere on stage for all of you delivering the play?
It's almost everything because the audience is another cast member. I mean, the dress rehearsals and so on in an empty theatre, they're okay, you know, from a technical point of view, but there is something utterly vital missing. An audience is a distinct organism on its own. And so there is a group energy which is communicated very powerfully to the actors on stage. And it's a symbiotic relationship, you know, going backwards and forwards. So, for instance, nowadays, one of the worst things that can happen is a mobile phone going on.
Yeah, yeah.
And it sadly happens more and more. And it's not simply the interruption of the noise, but it's because a section of that vital part of the whole enterprise is missing. Because there is an area around that mobile phone, if not sometimes the entire audience, that is cut off. Because the people in the audience don't like it, they're infuriated by it. The link between us and them, that psychic concentration, is completely broken. The actors on stage have to immediately focus the beam of their concentration from out there to the whole auditorium to right here. Hold on to it, hold on to it, hold on to it, hold on to your constant concentration. So that moment of a few seconds of a mobile phone is like a bomb going on.
How do you handle it when it happens?
If it happens, if it happens on an area where I am in complete control of that part of the play, and it's not somebody else who's speaking, and if it's just me that's speaking, I'll stop. And I will stop and I will look at the mobile phone and I will remain absolutely still and just give it the death stare.
Wow, that's going to be a pretty powerful reaction, I'd imagine, into the audience as well.
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
Yeah.
I will only do that if I'm the only person that gets affected by it. If it happens when somebody else is speaking and they choose to plow on, then there's
You
nothing
just go with it. Yeah, yeah.
to go with it. But it would be, and of course, how could it be otherwise? Because you don't have the experience of being what we are and experiencing what we do as actors. But you could not possibly overestimate the damage that is done by a mobile phone.
That's a very powerful point. As the other very powerful point you made is the audience is another cast member. I've never thought of it like that, and that's such an interesting way of putting it. But I totally get that. Have you
Yeah.
ever had that other cast member be really disappointing, as in you've had a kind of completely flat
Oh,
response?
very many times, very many times, you know. I mean, for instance, sometimes I found it very disappointing when we were doing Man for All Seasons, having performed a very powerful and emotional trial scene, and then at the end of the trial scene, walk up to the block, and the atmosphere is so intense going up to the block and down, head down on the block, and just before the axe falls, of course, there is a blackout. Normally, what happens is that there is a deep silence. And then the lights go up and the audience go, wow, my God. And then you get the applause. Sometimes if we get a less than ideal audience, the instant there's a blackout, they will start applauding. And at that point, the play hasn't finished.
Mm.
Because what happens is in the blackout, there's half a beat, and then the guy playing the common man who addresses the audience walks towards the front and he says, "Are you still breathing?" But clearly, yes, you are, because you're applauding, because this moment of tension that we've all so conscientiously built for you hasn't worked at all because you think,
Yeah.
"You can't wait to applaud, you know."
No, I get that. And it was, I mean, it was a good, when I came and saw you in that play recently in London, and it was exactly that. It was, the acts fell, big blackout, big silence, sort of audible silence, if you can have such a thing. And and then exactly as you'd probably have wanted it then with with a lot of applause. No, I
Yeah.
totally see that.
Yeah, fortunately, I mean, 99% of the time, that's what we have. But every now and again, I'll be standing in the wings and oh, shit. And you would get that applause before the end of the play.
What's the kind of funniest thing that's ever happened to you, as in funny, strange, or outlandish, odd experience on stage?
I would say probably the ones that I told you about were with working with Olivia, who was so playful on stage.
Yeah, but have you
Um,
had anything from the audience that's been weird like that that's caused
one of the weird funny things was I played Elvis Presley, and that ran for over a year. And there was a very deep Alan Bleasdale play about the last 3 hours of Elvis Presley's life. So it was very deep and very emotional, and Elvis was had an almost spiritual effect on some people who thought that he was
mm,
some sort of god. And the play ended with me as Elvis in a chair, experiencing the heart attack whilst, because it was a play with music, where whilst behind me was the young Elvis singing, "Are you lonesome?" As the lights are slowly going down, and I, as the old Elvis, I'm in the process of dying. And when we opened in Liverpool before we came to the West End, as the lights were going down, this voice at the back shouted out, "Don't die, Martin, don't die." Back up, I think, oh, okay.
Did you keep a straight face?
Well, fortunately, yes, but in any case, it was as the lights were going down. And clearly this poor girl had become very emotionally involved.
Yeah, yeah,
Don't
yeah.
die, Martin, don't die.
Brilliant. I love it. I think these stories are fantastic, and you've obviously seen so many different things. I mean, sadly, we've done the high points bit. I mean, there will you've talked about the professionals as a kind of the thing you enjoyed the least. Are there any other real kind of career low points that have been really challenging? And if there are, what have you taken from those? What have you learned from them?
I think so, because even the low points have had something positive about them. So genuinely, no, apart from, as I say, um, through 60 years, only two people have been difficult, and one of them apologized for it because
Mm.
he had been drinking. Um, and I think I've just been very fortunate, apart from times in the early days where I've been out of work for a while and I've started to get really worried. Um, but otherwise, no, I'm blessed. I've not had really low points.
Yeah, and I mean, actually, the out of work for a while, but you touched on that right at the beginning in terms of the kind of challenges today for actors and I guess the arts generally. And I mean,
Mm.
be really interested in your perspective on that because it seems to me that we're moving into a world where everyone's talking about things like artificial intelligence and what that's going to do, and that's clearly threatening or threatens to threaten at least lots of people in the work environment, particularly office-based workers and so on. But arguably, in my head at least, there is still going to be plenty of space for, arguably more so, if you've got more people who are with more time on their hands because they've all been augmented by wonderful new technology and those sorts of things to enjoy things like the arts. Now, that's a
Mm.
simplistic view that is probably somewhere in the future. But just your perspective on the profession that you've been in for so long, what do you think?
I think I'm very fortunate that I'm coming, I mean, naturally, I mean, it's not an opinion, it's counting, as they say. I'm coming to the point where it will be coming to a close. And I'm fortunate that I am not going to have to try to survive in the environment that exists now. We've got AI, we've got a general lowing in the zeitgeist of appreciation of the arts, a lack of patience. I mean, and it is personified by the number of times that a mobile phone goes off in the theatre. And even if it doesn't go off, I can look out at the front, or when my attention is in that direction beyond the fourth wall, I can see the lights of mobile phones going on and off all the time, because even if people have put it on silent, they're constantly checking it. So there is an unwillingness to concentrate and a magnetism towards what is easy rather than what's not so easy. I mean, it's really, I understand the temptation of being able to press a few buttons and have your groceries delivered. And I do that myself. But if it becomes an entire way of life, an expectation of continual ease, then there are portions of our personality, portions of our humanity, which is going to be cut off.
Is it affecting people joining the profession, though, do you think?
I don't know. I think perhaps too many people joining the profession will join the profession because they want to be in the glamorous part. They want to be, of course, understandably, we all do, to be in the very well-paid part, but also with the grossly mistaken idea that celebrity is important or that celebrity is gratifying.
Mm.
It's not in any way at all. It can be a profound nuisance. But even if it's not, it's in a world of ephemera, it's probably the most ephemeral thing that you could attach yourself to, because it is utterly and completely meaningless and shallow.
I was amused. I was talking to someone not that long ago, actually, about who would have ever thought that being a celebrity would be a career choice, because that is
Exactly.
absolutely what people talk about these days, isn't it? It's really, really odd that people could think that you could actually make that as a
Yeah.
as an active. I want to be a celebrity.
Yeah.
Okay, doing what?
Well, being a celebrity, of course.
Yeah.
And all right, I understand. I get that. If you want to earn enormous amounts of money, and if you're in that tiny, minuscule percentage of people who can make a living out of it, well, good on you, fine. But I don't think young people should aspire to do it. You should go into the arts, literally. Listen, I know this sounds frightfully pretentious, but it really is art for art's sake. You do it because it needs to be done. You do it because you want to do it, but it's dangerous in acting as one of the art forms, because it does involve the public in such a personal way and carries the possibility of celebrity. And if that becomes an end in itself, then you ain't going to make it. And if you do, you're going to be unhappy.
Yeah, and it's I think like a lot of professions. Again, we were talking about this on a different podcast a while ago in sport, where you look at almost any sport, and I think any profession you could apply this to as well. There are a very small number of people who make a tremendous success out of it, and hence make quite a lot of money out of it. There are an awful lot of others who are scratching a living at it, and I guess the arts in the round and acting in general is one of those kind of professions where you've got an awful lot of people who are very good at amateur or even low end professional dramatics, but are a lot less, well heeled in terms of making a living out of it than people would perceive.
Absolutely. I mean, the other thing that I think it's very important to bear in mind, I mean, to me, it is axiomatic that there is always, however successful I am, there will always be somebody somewhere who is better at it than I am. And so it's just serendipity. You need to be good. You need to know what you're doing. But there's always you were just lucky to be where you are. There's always somebody else who could have done a better job.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. No, that's 100% true.
Mm.
Very last question, Martin, which I always ask is, what's the most difficult question you've ever been asked?
You mean apart from this one?
Yeah, and everyone says that.
You know, I did ponder this because you sent me the questions you might ask, and I don't really know. I cannot recall one. I cannot recall. So maybe it's selective amnesia. I don't know.
Oh, well, that's a good thing. If you've never been asked a really difficult one, that's a good thing.
Yeah, I can't recall a question that has been really, really difficult. I mean, I think the nearest approach, and that wasn't all that difficult. I mean, it wasn't life-threatening at all. But when my dear friend, the late great Bill Kenwright, was one of our greatest theatrical producers, and he was going to put on the production of Ideal Husband and asked me to play the lead, Lord Goring, and I read it. And I didn't want to do it. And he was very, very, very persuasive. And that was a very difficult question to be asked because I wanted to say no. And in fact, I did say no because I hadn't the vision at that point to see what was possible in the role. So that was probably one of the, but I mean, that's a very benign answer to a difficult question. What is the most difficult question?
No, I guess that must happen quite a lot, though, particularly for people in your world who are successful, is you must be having to be quite selective about what you do and what you're going to accept and what you're going to turn down. I mean, we've all seen that with Hollywood stars where, they have some blockbuster movies and then they have some that are absolute horrors, and hopefully they have less of the latter than the former. But it was interesting. I was watching the Graham Norton show just the other day, and it was Matthew McConaughey, I think, talking about this, where actually changing his acting image. He was worried he was becoming stereotyped into rom-coms and wanted to break out of that. And it said it was a really uncomfortable space because he was turning away work, turning away work, turning away work, and it was kind of, I might have just ripped myself a one-way ticket out of Hollywood here. Which I thought was very, very interesting. That you is probably again not something that everyone thinks about as an obvious potential pitfall of your profession.
Absolutely, and I admire Matthew McConaughey for doing that. And I did notice that he had done that. He did a complete U-turn in his career and has produced some of the most brilliant work since doing that. So yes, I admire him for that.
Yeah, you got to be happy with what you're doing.
Oh yeah, absolutely. And sometimes, I've turned down things where I thought later on, that was really dumb. That was really, really dumb, I mean, after the enormous success of the Elvis show, where I had not only to act and be Elvis Presley, which in itself was a pretty daunting task, but also to sing as well. And I did it. It was an award-winning production. And so on the strength of that, I was offered a new show, a new musical called The Phantom of the Opera. Yeah.
And you said no, did you?
I said no.
All right.
And I remember the conversation with my agent. It was a brilliant, much loved and respected agent, again, now not with us. And she said, I think you're right, dear, to turn it down. I mean, who's going to want to watch a musical where the leading actor is covered by a mask and it's about a phantom of, I don't think it has any legs at all. And I didn't want to do it because I didn't want to go straight from playing an enormous singing role to another enormous singing role. And so I said no.
Wow.
And then when it opened with Michael Crawford and I went to see it, in all honesty and in all humility, genuine humility, I say, thank God I didn't do this, because his performance was a work of genius.
He was amazing. I mean, and actually, that's a really interesting thing as well, because at the time, he was known for kind of comedy roles, and no, I don't think, certainly, I mean, from my kind of non-expert view, most people were really surprised that, wow, where did he get that from? That's in a completely
not
different.
only a stunning performance, but what a voice.
Yeah, absolutely.
fantastic voice. And I thought, thank God Almighty, I didn't do this. I mean, they might never have known if I'd done it, that there was somebody, but it's back to what I said. There was somebody there who would have been not only better, but I mean, outer space better.
Yeah, no, that's that. Well, at least you're happy with the outcome of that. I mean, I've always thought with great amusement, actually, that the reputedly 2 or 3 different publishers turned down Harry Potter before before ultimately, you think, would you want to be the individual within that organization who's the one that said, "Nah, I don't think it's got much legs."
The man who turned down the Beatles,
Yeah, same thing, isn't it? Absolutely ridiculous. Martin, what an absolute treat. It has been so lovely to talk to you, and particularly to get, I think, a side of you that probably a lot of people don't know, and some of the aspects that we've talked about today. So I'm very, very grateful to you. I think it's a absolute privilege to have you on the show. I'm delighted. Thank you very much.
Well, thank you, Bob. And we've met many times before, but we've not been able to chat this long before. So it's been a joy. Thank you very much.
Not at all. Thank you, Martin. Take care.
Bless you, mate.
I really hope you've enjoyed this fantastic episode with Martin Shaw. I think it was as I said at the beginning, a real treat to have him on the show, and I feel very privileged that he was happy to do a podcast with me. So lots to take away. I think lots of tremendous insights and just a kind of real, I guess, fun inside track insight into someone in that kind of world, which is not something we always get. If you found it useful, please, as always, like it, share it, repost it, comment on it, do all those kind of things that help boost it and get it out to a broader audience. If you really find this stuff valuable and you're getting some really useful insights, then again, as I always say, then please do think about financially supporting the podcast, either through the support the show link in your podcast platform or by going to www.patreon.com/leading4life, 4, and you'll find the ability there to join as a supporter, or a champion, or a patron of the show. And it doesn't cost you a lot of money, but it'll make a huge big difference to what I'm trying to do with the show, and I'd be eternally grateful to you. So thank you very, very much indeed. Back again soon with another terrific guest, and in the meantime, have a great week ahead. All the best. Bye now.